This video will focus on the Personnel Transportation section of the SEFA Input Worksheet. This section is intended to inventory personnel transportation activities so that the associated environmental footprint can be calculated. The goal of inputting this information is to estimate total fuel usage associated with personnel transportation, which will ultimately be converted to estimated energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, and air emissions in your final environmental footprint summary. Consistent with the color coding throughout the SEFA workbooks, you will populate information in the yellow cells and select from the drop-down options in the red cells. The blue cells will be automatically calculated for you. In our first example, we have our participant making 10 trips to the site, living a round-trip distance of 20 miles. When you look at our mode of transportation options, you'll see several common options, including airplane, car, and light-duty passenger truck, and some less commonly used options, such as train or bus. In our example, let's assume that John travels by car, and that his car runs on gasoline. You'll see that the total distance transported was automatically calculated for us based on number of round trips and round-trip distance. You'll also see that once I selected a fuel type, a default fuel usage rate populated and a fuel used was automatically calculated. It's a good idea to put a note in your activity or notes section about why this transportation happened so that you can help with transportation tracking in the future. So let's do another example. Let's assume that Samantha is traveling to the site and lives 40 miles away, round trip. In this example, we'll assume that she's traveling by light-duty passenger truck, which also runs on gasoline. Let's say that for Samantha's truck, we have better information on her miles per gallon fuel efficiency than the default provided by SEFA. If we enter that information in this override column and press enter, you'll see that the fuel used automatically updates to use this fuel efficiency as opposed to the default. A common issue that you can run into while entering this information is that you will run out of rows for each of your participants traveling to the site. One way to deal with this is to compile this information on a separate tab. So in this example, let's say that we wanted to compile all of our airplane travel into one row. You can see in this workbook, I've made a separate tab called Personnel Transportation, where I've tabulated all known airplane travel to the site. You can see I've separated it by person, and I've also noted the date of their travel and the airports they were traveling between. It's important to also include layovers during this travel summary. So here I've found a total airplane miles traveled of 13,028. If I return to my input template, I can now enter in a single row one airplane trip of 13,028 miles. I'll select airplane from the drop-down menu and diesel as our fuel type. When you do something like this, it's a good idea to reference the secondary tab in your notes section. Another thing to note here is if you have actual information on fuel used and don't need to do these calculations, it can often be better to enter that information further down the worksheet in this Other Energy Use and Air Emissions tab, specifically in the Transportation section starting in line 160. Another thing to note is that if you do select electricity as your fuel usage, it will assume you are using on-site electricity to charge your vehicle. If you're using off-site electricity instead, you will also want to enter that information in Other Energy Use and Air Emissions as opposed to the Personnel Transportation section.